Welcome to Methodically Processing Systems. Imagine that you've been hurled back to the time before you were born. You find yourself in a bright room. Mysterious creatures hand out personality and character traits for humans about to be born. One of these creatures reaches into an ethereal bag and presents you with 3 options to help you live and thrive in this complex world of ours. You can be smart, you can be dumb, or you can have nothing to lose. Which of these traits would you choose? Each option has its pros and cons, and being good modern people, we would probably opt to be smart. It's like an automatic reflex, a byproduct of an education system that values being smart above all else. But could you actually thrive in this world if you selected one of the other options? To get a different perspective, let's go back in time to ancient China. We've traveled to around 2,500 years ago, and a Chinese military strategist by the name of Sun Tzu is writing something that he calls the art of war. Sun Tzu doesn't know it yet, but the words he's putting down are going to survive the next 25 centuries. His words will be translated into many languages. Millions of copies will be sitting in warehouses around the world, available to anyone who wants them, with 2-day free shipping. His work will also be available in electronic form for people of the future to buy and leave unread on their electronic reading devices. What more could an ancient philosopher hope for? Now, he didn't know it at the time, but Sun Tzu will help you answer the question I asked at the beginning of this show. Would you rather be smart? Would you rather be dumb? Or would you rather have nothing to lose as you make your way through a complex world? In his text, Sun Tzu describes 9 types of ground, or situations that you can find yourself in when you find yourself in a conflict. The most interesting of these grounds is the final one, desperate ground. In more dramatic translations, desperate ground is also called the death ground. The death ground is where your back is to the wall, your enemies have you cornered, and you have nowhere to turn. All that's left are 2 choices. Fight your way out, or die. In other words, you have nothing left to lose, and nowhere left to go. Sun Tzu describes the desperate ground as follows. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay is desperate ground. On desperate ground, Sun Tzu provides only one prescription for his reader. Fight. If you are backed into a corner, you have to fight with everything you've got. After all, you don't really have a choice. Your only options are to fight or die. If you do fight with everything you've got, maybe, just maybe, you can survive. To increase the chances of survival on the death ground, Sun Tzu goes further. On desperate ground, I would proclaim to my soldiers the hopelessness of saving their lives. In other words, the only thing you have left that's holding you back on your death ground is the fear of death, the fear of losing your life. Your only chance at life is to lose that fear. As Sun Tzu says, the only chance of life lies in giving up all hope of it. He continues, place your army in deadly peril, and it will survive. Plunge it into desperate straits, and it will come off in safety. Now let that soak in for a minute. It's deliciously counterintuitive. The modern mind can barely wrap its rational tendrils around it. We like to think things through directly. To us, if you want to be safe, then you should play it safe. If you want to protect yourself, then you have to protect yourself. If you want to move forward, then you have to move forward. But Sun Tzu tells us the opposite. If you want to move forward, you need to take a step backwards. If you want to survive, then you have to plunge yourself into peril. This ancestor of ours, from a time we consider backwards only because it came before us in this great timeline, was more in tune with the complexity of the world than most of us alive today. He understood that all you see is not all there is. An input into a complex system doesn't guarantee a particular output. It doesn't guarantee an output at all. It could generate a billion outputs. Just because you are on desperate ground doesn't mean that you're doomed. Just because something hurts you doesn't mean that it weakens you. Just because you think that you can see the future doesn't mean that the future will unfold the way that you saw it. The complex world is non-linear. It's noisy. Signals come from every direction. They are processed by even noisier systems. Just because you know the inputs into a system doesn't mean that you know the outputs. Just because you are in peril doesn't mean that you won't survive. Sun Tzu is telling us that placing yourself in peril can actually help you be more safe. And as we've said on this show 100 times, it's not the things that you're worried about that'll get you. It's the things that you aren't worried about that'll eventually bite you. Being in peril tunes your brain to all the things that can bite you, so you make sure that they can't actually bite you. There is a simple mathematical basis to Sun Tzu's counterintuitive insight. The death ground is your advantage because it's a simple choice. You either fight for the chance to live, which leaves you with a near infinite space of possibilities, or you die and you get multiplied by 0. End of game. The act of fighting increases your chances of surviving, and surviving gives you infinite possibilities, or at least near infinite possibilities. Now, even a small chance, a small probability multiplied by a really big number like infinity is going to be a very, very big number. So in front of you, you have this big number, this near infinite opportunity. And behind you, you have nothing. The choice is simple. You fight with everything you've got for the big number. Now, for the people who are pursuing you on your death ground, the equation is not so favorable. The best that they can hope to achieve after cornering you is to kill you. It's a very limited outcome. The worst that can happen to them is that they die. They get multiplied by 0. They are, in effect, limited on both sides of the equation, and you're only limited on one. Now, if they don't follow you into your death ground, and if they don't pursue and fight you, they can walk away and have the world of infinite possibilities of life available to them. But there's one catch, even if they decide to walk away, a limiting factor, if you will. And that's the fact that if you survive, you might show up when they least expect it and multiply them by 0. So even on that third side, it's not as clear an equation. And so to the people on the other side of the equation, Sun Tzu gives 2 pieces of wisdom. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Not because you want to let them go free, but because you don't want to give them the gift of being on desperate ground. Now Sun Tzu continues, do not press a desperate foe too hard. Now, this is because Sun Tzu understands that a cornered opponent, whether it's a human or animal, is a most dangerous creature you can encounter. It has nothing to lose, and it will gladly take you down with it, with everything that it's got. Even if it doesn't know that simple equation in any conscious sense, its instincts have been honed to it. On your death ground, you have unlimited freedom. You can do anything that you want because you have nothing to lose. And that makes you the most formidable opponent anyone can face. So, would you rather be smart? Would you rather be dumb? Or would you rather have nothing to lose? A smart person in a complex world is actually at a huge disadvantage. Their understanding of the world can start to limit their ability to act in the world. Remember, as we learned with OODA loops, your model of the world is always going to be imperfect, and it needs to be constantly updated. Armed with imperfect knowledge, smart people can build up a model of the world that limits them in arbitrary and incorrect ways. Imagine the tragedy of being held back by an error in your model of reality. And now consider that every model of reality is imperfect. Every model of reality is filled with errors. A dumb person, by comparison, doesn't care about much of anything. In some sense, they're just a random algorithm that happens to get lucky or unlucky. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, and in the long run, they usually don't go very far in either direction. But a person who has nothing to lose, a person who is on their death ground, have nothing to lose, but everything to gain. They have the ultimate freedom in how they act and engage with the world. And this is why Sun Tzu warns you to not let your enemy believe that they are cornered on their death ground. With more degrees of freedom, a person with nothing to lose can start going through a frenzy of OODA loops. They can just try anything that can raise their probability of success and see what sticks. What's the worst that can happen if you already believe you're dead, right? And as we learned in our last episode, the competitor that can run through more OODA loops will always win the engagement. Today, most of us are far from our death grounds. The farther away we get, the more we feel inclined to play it safe. But Sun Tzu's ancient strategic advice carries through time and helps those who are willing to heed its dusty but still brilliant wisdom. The late Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, once said, "If you're going to be creative, it's like jumping up in the air. You want to make damn sure the ground is going to be there when you get back." When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he had the ultimate ground to work with. Apple was on its death ground, 90 days away from bankruptcy. Apple had nothing to lose. But that's not to say anyone could have turned the death ground to their advantage. Steve himself, by the nature of his personality, had nothing to lose. He was a free agent. Years later, he would remark, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important." In other words, he understood that life, in some sense, is just one big death ground. In the end, you're dead anyways. Steve was therefore always on his death ground. Now, compare that to your typical MBA executive, the kind who has certifications, diplomas, and a reputation to protect. They have a lot to lose and not much to gain, so they played safe. Steve, on the other hand, could afford to experiment because he had nothing to lose. He could make decisive and hard choices because he didn't care about his reputation. When all that's behind you is death, does your reputation really matter? So bit by bit, he helped Apple turn the company around. He gave room to crazy, risky ideas. Colorful computers in a world of beige boxes. Music players from a computer company. A phone, a tablet. All of them were crazy ideas, the product of wild experiments. Even as Apple grew healthier, Steve was still on his death ground. He didn't get complacent, and he didn't care about failing. He infused this within Apple's culture. It's unclear if the Apple of today is still on its death ground, or if it is more tuned to protecting what it already has. It's hard to stay on your death ground with astronomical success like Apple has. It's much more tempting to become protective of all that you have gained. Unlike Steve Jobs, you, me, and most of the world care about not losing what we have. We are far from our death ground, so we think we need to be intelligent and clever to make it through the world unscathed and without losses. We limit the things that we can do to what our intelligence allows. We would look at a world of beige computers and say, clearly there is strong evidence that people want beige computers, and so let's make another beige computer. Our intelligence reduces our freedom to explore, to tinker, and to experiment. The more we know, the more we have, the more we find ourselves frozen and static. Every fear that you have chops off a branch of possibilities for you. Everything that you're afraid of losing locks you into a more limited range of motion. The irony of it all is that the more you fear, the more your fears limit the possibilities available to you, the more you grow likely to lose all the things that you hold dear. To move forward, sometimes you must move backward. To prevent the loss of the things that you hold dear, you must lose your fear of loss. You must chip away at your fears until all that remains is your fear of death. When that's all that's left, you chip away at that too. Death, after all, is inevitable. Then, and only then, are you on your death ground. and open to an endless array of possibilities.